everyone. Welcome back to the Genetic Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lulu. On this week's episode, Erin Walker discusses how to be empowered by learning how your hormones function and how to activate them for complete alignment and balance. Erin is a board-certified holistic practitioner and bioenergetics practitioner. She suffered with chronic illness and disease for many years and now helps people balance their health naturally by addressing root causes and facilitating life-changing healing journeys. She has over 6 years of holistic health education, advanced training, certifications, and clinical experience in personalized root cause healing and optimizing health. She's extremely passionate and knowledgeable about the body's innate ability to heal itself when given what it needs. She teaches about lifestyle design, disease prevention, and learning the language of your body's physical and emotional symptoms. Through one-on-one personalized coaching, nutritional cleanse programs, meridian stress assessments, and educational programs, she supports women in freeing themselves from health limitations, struggles, and blockages. Her current focus is in helping women release chronic health issues like hormone imbalances, digestive disorders, inability to lose weight, period issues, etc. She suffered from early perimenopause, anxiety, hypothyroidism, and insomnia, and a lifetime of random symptoms, and is now free from a life of chronic disease, doctor's visits, and prescription drugs. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Genetic Genius Podcast. I'm so thrilled to have today on the show Erin Walker. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lulu. It's so great to be here.
Yay, you're welcome. And it's so cool that you're in my hometown, Atlanta. I just feel like a big heart hug for Atlanta.
Atlanta is not my place of birth and where I grew up, but it feels like a second home to me. And I love it. It's like the best of both worlds. You're not too hot in the South all the way, but you're also, I don't miss the snow in New York.
Yeah, it's a good combo. I wasn't born there either. I just lived there a lot as a little kid. And yeah, I have those memories of climbing up magnolia trees and all that good stuff. Before we dive deep into talking about hormones, which, of course, we both love to talk about, I would just like you to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience and just talk about what you do, your passions, so we can get to know you just a little bit better.
Yeah, sure. So I am a board certified holistic health coach, nutritional health coach, and bioenergetics practitioner. I began my journey towards health coaching actually in undergrad. I have an undergraduate degree in health education and health science, and then lived life, did the corporate thing, had kids, went through lots of trauma and so forth, and went through a health crisis of my own where I thought I was going to die. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was having migraines and insomnia and period issues and gaining weight and brain fog and anxiety, literally going to the ER with migraine, thinking I had an aneurysm because I'd never had one before.
Oh, wow.
And my husband having to rub my feet and shoulders to get the anxiety to release when it would take hold at night and I'd come out of nowhere. And after a year and a half of going through this and going to the primary care doctor and gynecologist and a few naturopaths, I found the right naturopath who knew enough about my body and very easily say, you're in a perimenopause-like state. Your body thinks you're in perimenopause. And I was classic textbook perimenopause. And he started treating me very simply in that way. And I felt better within a couple of weeks. But then I learned that, several months later, after testing and peeling back the layers on other things like what I was eating and so forth, that I actually had Hashimoto's. And it was the early stages of it rearing its head, which can resemble a lot of those perimenopause-like symptoms. And so this whole experience really impressed upon me how important it is as women for us to know how our bodies work. And it's just not something we're taught. When you are 16, 18, and you start going to the gynecologist, they don't tell you, here's the basics on how your menstrual cycle works and the organs that are related to it and how the other systems that are connected, like your gut and what you eat and stress. And here's how you can take care of and protecting that system for the rest of your life. We don't know. And so we're reliant on somebody else to tell us what's wrong with us. And if they don't get it right, we still suffer. So I went back to school. First went to health coaching school to learn how to use food as medicine and understand the connection between food and healing our bodies. And then I had been a patient of bioenergetics, specifically meridian stress assessment, off and on for years. And then I realized that was a really important thing to add to my practice to get to the root of the energetic root of what's going on in our bodies and let the body basically guide us. And then overall, after that, I've just added additional certifications in hormones and supplementation and functional medicine. So I am right outside the Atlanta, Georgia area, as I mentioned, and I support women in particular who are dealing with symptoms of hormone to balance themselves naturally and empower them by understanding first how their bodies work and how to nurture nature.
Wow, that's great, Erin. I love that. What a great story too. It's inspiring because I think there's so many women that have that same, maybe not exactly the same, but very similar. And and I like what you said too about that piece where we're not educated as women. It should be taught. I remember what my sex education class was like, and there was boys in the room, which I think is one part. You're like, you're never going to ask a question about like your cycle or anything. If there's maybe somebody you have a crush on sitting right next to you, you'd be horrified.
I was the sex ed teacher for a few years.
Yeah. So I think that's a great piece that needs to be put into our school system, or maybe even a separate class, because school systems can just mess things up. 100%. Where it may be a sex educator like ourselves, where it comes in and talks about women's health to those teenagers. Hey, this is your body. This is how it works. It's all okay. Everything's going to be okay with the right tools, like you said, the gut and everything. So I really like that a lot. Thanks for bringing that up.
Of course.
So important. Yes. And also that piece you talked about as the perimenopause and that thyroid connection. So important.
Yeah. Because I really would have been misdiagnosed, and I was, but not, right? Like the treatment helped. But then a year later, I started yo-yoing just a little bit, but not as severe, right? Because some of the baseline, the effect of the thyroid to the adrenals it made sense that I needed some DHEA.
Right.
I needed to reduce stress. I needed to nurture the adrenals. But it was really the adrenals wasn't the root. The thyroid was pulling on the adrenals, but it helped me though, because the adrenals were tired and under-resourced. They still needed all those things I was doing, but I really wasn't paying a specific attention to the thyroid. So then those little symptoms started creeping in and out. But the systemic thyroid imbalance symptoms can just mimic so many other things. It's why it's the number one misdiagnosed hormone imbalance.
Right. It's so true. It can mimic, and it's all connected. You can have, like you said, helping with one part of the hormonal system can then have that tiered effect, or that I can't think of the term, the downstream effect of helping all the other hormones for sure. So let's talk about hormones. We're getting already deep into it, right? We're ahead of the game, everybody. But so let's talk about just like basics of hormones, because I think that's important. What is a hormone and how does it function in the body? Let's just lay the ground rules.
Yeah, absolutely. So at its simplest level, hormones are chemical messengers in the body, and they give direction to our cells and every organ in the body from the brain. And it's the brain's way of communicating and telling each organ and cell in the body what to do.
Right.
And as women, we are familiar with hormones because, we are often stereotyped as being hormonal.
Right.
But it doesn't do justice to one, that hormones affects everybody, male, female, children, adults. We all have them to function. Without them, we would not be able to function. There'd be no air traffic controllers in the body, but all the hormones in the body work together. So as women, we know something about estrogen, a little bit. We know a little bit about, maybe we've heard of something called testosterone or progesterone. That's probably about it, most of us, if you're fortunate. We know a little bit about something called insulin, but a lot of people don't realize insulin is a hormone.
Yeah, exactly.
Things like that, melatonin and cortisol, that they are hormones from the gut, like serotonin, and that all these hormones work together in a beautiful symphony from all the different parts of the body when they are in the right ebb and flow and quantities. And one imbalance can make the whole symphony sound horrible, whether it's an imbalance in the blood sugar, or the gut is making serotonin levels off, or a strain in the pituitary gland is making your thyroid conversion not great, whatever it might be. And then it can mess up the whole thing. So we may think period problems, for example, have nothing to do with gut health when they actually are all interconnected. And so I think that's like the beauty and also some of the challenge of hormones.
Exactly. Yeah. I loved how you explained that. I like to think of it as the funny, like telephone game when we used to play with a kid, where you have the big string in the middle and the brain is telling one thing, and then it hears a totally different message like down the road. You're like, wait, what happened?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have to really be the one-to-one communication between those neurocommunications and those neurotransmitters. So important.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. So we have the basics of hormones. So important. Like you said, said. So let's talk about what specific hormones play a role in regulating our cycles specifically. And we're talking about menstrual cycles. So what are the specific ones there? Because there's like you mentioned, a couple key players, but there's also other ones too, right?
Yes. So the stars of the show are estrogen and progesterone. We need those lovely ovaries of ours producing the right amounts of estrogen and progesterone at the right parts of the cycle. At its simplest level, like the first part of your cycle, you've got higher levels of estrogen. Second half of your cycle, you have higher levels of progesterone, and they like ebb and flow in that way. And then you've got lots of other supporting actors that come about, like follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, that support the maturation of the eggs in the ovaries, the release of the egg from the follicle, and so forth. Those are the four main hormones that control like your cycle from days 1 to 28. But then you've got other supporting players in other parts of the body that regulate the production of those things, when those things are released and how much, and like thyroid, all the thyroid hormones, whether it's thyroid stimulating TSH, T4, T3, cortisol, stress hormone, plays a big factor in whether or not it's going to allow those other hormones to do their jobs. Insulin, blood sugar related hormones also plays a factor in those things, just to name a few.
Yes, we have a lot.
We could go down the list, but the main stars are estrogen, progesterone, and then follicle FSH and LH supporting that ovulatory cycle, the uterine lining, like thickening and expectation to nurture and a fertilized egg. And if not, then that lining is shed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I love how you describe that as kind of like this play, because we're always, as women, and that's whoever's listening out there, that's how I feel like we're in this our own play right throughout the month. And we have all these different factors coming in, like you said, that affect our play. And is it going to be a drama this month? Or maybe it's going to be a horror story. Really, or maybe it's going to be a love story, right?
I love that analogy, because essentially every week of your cycle is a different act in the play, where a different hormone is like doing something different. And so our job is to understand the cadence of the actors coming on off the stage, so to speak, and knowing what they need to do their best. When we get that basic cadence down, then we really can optimize not only our cycles, but for women, your cycle is one of our key indicators of our overall health and wellness.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we can have the applause in the background. Time comes up from the TV show, applause.
I love this analogy. I think we have something going here.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk. So you mentioned irregularity a little bit. So when a menstrual cycle starts to become irregular, what does that look like? Because I think if you can set some of those kind of time frames, listeners out there, you can say, oh yeah, I thought my cycle was regular, but I'm in this frame, or I'm way out of it. And then when should they seek out a health practitioner?
Yes, great question. This is like one of the most common health issues. So irregularity generally is when your normal cycle of periods is different than it normally is for you. And I define it in that way because every woman's normal cycle is different. Generally, if the length of days from day one of your start of your period all the way through to the day before the next period starts is less than, I'd say 22, 24 days. Okay, that's really too short. And you really want to like figure out why that is. Usually that means you're not ovulating like you should, have lower progesterone levels or something like that. The range from those 5 or 6 days can still be considered normal. It doesn't have to be a perfect 28-day cycle. That's important.
Right. There's no perfection as women. We're all
so if you're within 4 or 5 days or so of that 28-day cycle, then you're still considered in the normal range. That's okay. And if something goes awry from what you're used to, then that would be irregularity. I recommend tracking your cycle so you know exactly what's going on. Don't guess, like let an app like that for you. There's several free ones. Usually the most common symptoms are periods are coming sooner than they normally would. You're bleeding more frequently or less. You're having more time between periods. It might even skip a month. The length of the cycle might also shift. So you might start have longer cycles. If your average is 5 to 7 days, you might start bleeding 8, 9, 10 or more days, or they might start to get really short. But usually it's longer and more frequently or less frequently. If they're less frequently, then usually there's an imbalance with the progesterone. It means progestation. So it's designed to help the uterus to support a growing baby. And so when that hormone gets low, which is one of the first hormones that starts to decline as we get into our mid to late 30s and 40s and starting to head into perimenopause, then you don't have enough of the hormone to extend your cycle to the normal length. And so as that starts to drop, it signals to the body, oh, it's time to have a period and shed the lining to move on to the next cycle. So one, you want to get that checked and see if the reason why you're having shorter periods and closer together periods is because your progesterone levels are a little bit off, or the cadence between progesterone and estrogen is off for some reason. If you're on the opposite end of the spectrum where you're starting to have longer periods, sometimes it's a sign that you are headed a little bit closer to menopause and you're slowly going to start to miss periods. It can also be a sign that you've got something off with estrogen and progesterone symphony going on as well. Maybe you're not ovulating, or the ovulation cycles are a little bit longer. Something is like awry. It could be multiple things, but sometimes people skip a month and then it comes back the third month. Then they skip 2 months and it comes back the third month. And a lot of times it's even like a pituitary type thyroid type thing, right? We're just, you're not really low in the ovarian hormones, but the higher level regulatory mechanism like your thyroid and pituitary glands that's designed to rule the roosts for all those things and keep the cycle off there. That could be stress related, that could be autoimmune related. And you want to get all of those things checked so you have a full spectrum of what's happening with your hormones and can really get to the root.
Oh, that's great, Erin. You know what I like too is you said the testing of the whole body, right? Or not the, maybe, but yes, but the hormones that are in that cascade, because when we don't do that, which I see, and I'm sure you do in your practice too, where women will come in and they're like, just had one test. Oh yeah, we just tested your estrogen and everything's normal. I'm like, whoa, that is not how our body works. So if you're listening out there and you need something's out of alignment, just like Erin said, whether you're having short cycles, and that's another follow-up question. So what's that time frame for, say you miss one cycle or you're noticing those short, should you wait a couple months and see if things regulate up, or should you said tracking it, which I love that. Should they track it for a couple months? You're like, oh yeah, so I'm every 2 months I'm missing a cycle, or, oh, every 2 months my cycle is now 10 to 12 days.
That's a great question. I think it depends on your situation, right? Like I'm a little bit like OCD about anything that goes awry with my cycle, but I track it though. And I know when something is off. Yeah. Like I started having some mid-cycle bleeding one time and I went to my gynecologist immediately. I was like, something is wrong. And sometimes it depends on your doctor. He was like, you're fine. It happens. But I knew something was still wrong because that was not normal. And I wanted to know why. But they do recommend, if you don't track it, this is why, like you said, tracking is so important. You probably are going to have to wait a little bit. It's an anomaly. Were you really stressed? Did you have a trauma happen that just sent your whole body out of whack? It happens. Like the mind and body work together. Was your diet particularly crappy, or do you have some sort of sensitivity that could have just created a lot of inflammation and knocked that completely out of whack? Do you have another health issue that flared up, or that maybe you weren't aware of and you just found out about, that could have a trickle down effect? So like all those things matter. Or is it just a fluke because of some of those things, or is it an emergence of something that your body is telling you like you need to address? In my opinion, regardless, symptoms are a sign. It's a way of your body's communicating with you.
Right. Hello. So phone calls coming in.
Yeah. If it's not right, you need to pay attention to it. Just know that depending on what kind of practitioner you go to and what their philosophies are, sometimes they may brush it off as though it's nothing or not really know exactly what to do about it. So tracking is so important, because then you have to wait less because you already know data about your body.
And it's so important, going back to that piece you talked about earlier of education, right? As women, we want to be educated and know how our body's working. So tracking helps you to know about how it's working, but also what to do. Oh, if this is a symptom or this is coming up, you can talk to someone and get help. And what are some of your favorite, you mentioned there's a bunch of free apps out there, what's your top favorite one you recommend?
I personally use Flow.
I love Flow. Flow's great.
Yes. And the person who makes Flow, I've got nervous brain right now, but she has a ton of great books. One of them is called Woman Code, and she is a health coach and natural practitioner. It's a really easy to use app. It's free. It gives you a lot of great information about what's happening at any point in your cycle as well. So it does a great job with educating and giving you tips on like nutrition and movement and how you might be feeling and what the symptoms mean. And in particular, I like it because it asks you to log your symptoms each day.
Exactly.
So not just your period, but it's like, what are you feeling each day? And then you get a record over time of when you typically feel certain things. And then they educate you on why that might be and give you tips on how to resolve them. So you get a lot of information for free.
Yeah. And that's a really important. I like that you said that piece about being able to track it, because when we have that data and we can look back, you want to be able to go to your health practitioner and be able to pull up the data and say, okay, during my PMS phase, I'm just like crazy. So you can have that information and like, something's not quite right. I haven't been like this. And now I just want to tear the wallpaper off the walls.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. I don't know how I survived in my 20s and 30s. I didn't start tracking my periods really until I got 40. And now I look back on it and I'm like, how the heck did I do this? And I never really, I just guesstimated and it happened. But although if you're on birth control, it does it for you, I guess. But that's a whole nother conversation.
We'll have you back to talk about that. That's a whole nother can of, what is it, the expression, can of wax, ball of wax, a can of worms.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about that irregular piece and tracking the cycle, which is so important to figure out what's going on. And then what factors come into play then that affect the function of the hormones at that cellular level, like the mitochondria, how the cells are communicating. What are some of those outside factors that you mentioned, stress earlier, that really start to play a key on how our hormones are functioning and the changes in our cycle that we might want to be aware of?
Yeah. So let's start with stress, for example, which is usually one of the biggest ones for anything that goes around the body. So when your adrenal glands, two little organs on top of each kidney that sit like little hats, and they are a small but mighty and central part to managing your entire hormonal system. And its primary job is to release stress hormone, cortisol, and it's designed to keep you alive when you are under any sort of stressor. And so your body, right? So your body's going to always prioritize making cortisol when it needs it over other hormones that the adrenals also make: progesterone, testosterone, and some estrogen-like hormones. And so when you are under heightened levels of stress, whether from internal things like eating a giant cupcake every single day and it raises your blood sugars and creates—
hopefully you're not doing that. That's not good for your hormones.
No, but that's why though, right? It creates a stress response in the body. Or you got into a tiff with your spouse or your child got on your nerves, right? The body doesn't know the difference. It's going to respond in the same way by releasing stress hormone. And so the impact on the body is it's going to affect your blood sugar regulation. They speak to each other hand in hand, but the adrenals also affect your thyroid. So you have that trilogy: thyroid, adrenals, and pancreas as a bit of an axis in the body. And so when the adrenals are pushing out those high levels of cortisol, it affects the thyroid's ability to regulate a lot of the hormones that control our menstrual cycle at its simplest level is how that works. Right. It can push down progesterone levels. It can make your estrogen levels be wonky. It can reduce FSH and LH and their effectiveness and your ability to ovulate like you're supposed to, fertility levels, heaviness of periods by promoting estrogen dominance, and a whole slew of other things. And so that's really how the connection for stress, for example, can make your periods be just wonky there. But then you have other factors, like sometimes it's a level above the thyroid where it's like a pituitary or hypothalamus issue. Pituitary is a small gland in your brain and it speaks directly to your thyroid, but it also can speak directly to your as well. And so when that is off, often due to stress or imbalance in nutrients, for example, then that communication between the brain to control all the things is off. The slightest offness, right, as we mentioned at the beginning, can just create a cascade of imbalance, create the irregularities in periods. And then last thing I'll say, and sometimes it's a gut thing.
That's right.
So sometimes what we eat then has a domino effect to those other systems that we just talked about. So dairy is a really big factor for women who have irregular periods, especially like if you got PMS issues, painful periods, and heavy periods and long periods. One of the first things I usually recommend is remove dairy. It's very inflammatory. The things in it just affect how the digestive system is able to absorb or not absorb nutrients. It compromises the integrity of the lining of the digestive system, and the digestive system has a lot to do in regulating hormones or creating byproducts that regulate hormones down the line. So those are just a couple of things to start that I usually start with, looking at what people are eating, levels of stress in their body, what their insulin levels are looking like, and how blood sugar is playing a factor with the domino effect of irregularity in periods. Looking at cortisol levels, ideally like a 24-hour cortisol assessment where we look at it in the morning, midday, and evening, and late at night, so you can see how they ebb and flow throughout the day. A once a day at 10 a.m. for cortisol is not sufficient to understand the functioning of the adrenals.
No, definitely not. Yeah. Oh, those are great. I love all those. And the last piece that you said too, that I often see a patient will come into me and they've had one cortisol run and a blood cortisol level. I'm like, this is not showing because our cortisol does not function just once. It's a wave, right? Of how it functions. And if you're just getting a snapshot, you're definitely not getting how your body is responding, especially if you're waking up in the middle of the night or you're exhausted when you get up in the morning. There's obviously some problems with your cortisol levels and you're not catching it.
Absolutely. 100%. It's one of the most important diagnostics, I think, for anything hormonally related, frankly, health related, that is so telling for a lot of things that can go awry in the body.
Right. Yeah. I personally test my cortisol levels and when I do my hormones every 3 months, because I just want to see, okay, how are things going? I want to see how my body's responding because I use it as a stress marker.
Yeah.
Like, how am I handling my stress? Do I need to change things up in my system, etc.? And okay, so we're talking about that piece where things can affect the cellular function, how the hormones, I loved how you mentioned the brain too. So important. People don't think about our brain is communicating all the time with the rest of the body. It's not just like from the head up, it's from the whole body.
100%.
Yeah.
And even like nutrients,
Mhm.
if you're not eating in the right way, you're not giving your body the right building blocks to facilitate the hormonal processes. You may even have sometimes the hormones in the right cadence, they're ebbing and flowing like they're supposed to, they're at the right levels, but you're just not eating in the way so that your body doesn't have the right cofactors to facilitate and let it do its job. So like cells have receptors for hormones.
Exactly.
But you know what? There has to be usually an enzyme or a vitamin or some sort of nutrient that allows that hormone to attach to the receptor and then affect the cell, for example, just to name a few, or like the liver, right? The liver needs a copious amounts of nutrients and resources to then try to get rid of those hormones when they're used or too many of them. But if you're not consuming those things, so some of them can't be produced by the body, or in order for them to be produced, they need the nutrients to make the thing.
Exactly.
And oftentimes simply making changes in your diet to make sure you're giving your body a good amount of those factors that facilitate the processes happening can be game changing.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And nutrition is a huge piece of hormones. And we'll definitely touch on that today because I think people don't understand how much food we eat affects our hormones. I think it's, I don't know, maybe the 100%, like it's huge. Everything we eat is affecting our body, but especially our hormones. So when we're talking about seeing some dysfunction happen at that cellular level, are you seeing a lot more clients in your practice, like really having changes recently due to changes in our environment, more toxins, more pollutions, things we're eating earlier in life than you have in the past?
Yes. So when I first started out, most of my clients were women, late 30s, mostly 40s, 50s, going through perimenopause, postmenopausal, and just dealing with expected hormonal shifts in life. And I've noticed the last year or so, I'm starting to have more younger clients who are dealing with fertility issues and period issues, especially heavy periods, fibroids, endometriosis in particular, and haven't been able to get answers or help from a traditional medicine perspective of what's going on. And when you do like testing, you realize that their toxin levels are often off the charts, but they don't realize that I eat healthy and I buy a natural face cleanser or whatever it may be, but most of us don't realize that we're bombarded with toxins everywhere. And over decades of that, being exposed to that, they just like to nestle into every nook and cranny in our body. And the poor cells just literally become paralyzed and can't do what they need to do. In my programs, I always start everybody with a 14-day detox.
Get them
very gentle one, but
started.
it's just like, you got to get those out. And they come from everywhere, like the common things like pesticides, but not just in your food and wanting to eat organic, but even like putting pesticides in your grass and exterminators coming into your house. So like all of those things, air fresheners, beauty products, things that cleaning products for our home, soaps, a lot of things that are heavily perfumed. So a lot of environmental things that really are not just about eating organic. The meat that we eat, right? Whether it's farm raised and more natural versus not, all of that matters. And so it can be overwhelming because you can feel like, how can I live? And it's not about an absolute truth, like one end of the spectrum than another. It's about making small changes over time that add up because it took you decades to get here. Right?
Yeah. It's not like overnight, you're like, boom.
Some things you can control, some things you can't, but you'd be surprised how making small changes to reduce the toxin load in the body can then allow, as you mentioned, the mitochondria, particularly in the cells, to unleash their full power and potential and for your body to just function the way that it was intended to.
Oh, so important. I love that. Toxins are a huge aspect of our hormonal health. And I think that, like you said, that bombarded piece, people do get overwhelmed, especially if you're already in stress mode and stress is affecting your cortisol levels. You're like, oh my God, I just can't even think. What am I going to do? I can't, you're
Yeah.
telling me like to remove all toxins from my life. No, that's not what we're saying, because that can be
Mhm.
really overwhelming.
Totally.
In 2021, I did reduce all plastic come in my
Yeah.
environment. And that is really hard. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to buy no plastic at the store. I'm going to do all refills. I'm going to reuse everything. It was like, wow, people are doing this. This is hard work. It's not something easy. And so I did it slowly, like changing my deodorant where I use an all natural refill deodorant, things like that. And so changing it slowly where it doesn't cause you so much stress. You don't have to change it overnight, Erin said.
One thing at a time. I think when I started, I did the same as you. I started with a natural deodorant, like Humble brands. Kind of just depends on what works for your body. I started adding and changing like my household cleaning products. So a girl raised in the South, a lot of bleach and water and Lysol and all of
iced tea and bleach.
Yes, without that, it's not clean. But learned a lot about other ways to get things really clean and sanitize and disinfect. And now there's copious brands that are more natural and gentler on the body. That was huge because you do so much cleanup every day, wearing gloves even, right? So that you're absorbing that into your skin when you are using any of those products, whether natural or not using air fresheners and the
so
plugins in the wall. Yeah, those sorts of things, but instead learning how to use essential oils and diffusers, simply opening the windows to let fresh air in the house.
Simple things of fresh air.
I think my last layer was like replacing all my beauty products. It took me a while because I had a line that I loved, but no more manicures and pedicures with the gel nails. That was huge for me. Literally soaking your fingers in acetone. If you think about that for 45 minutes, it's not
that's bad. That's not good for your hormones.
The stuff we put on our face and skin, anything that goes on your skin that you eat or drink or breathe in goes to your liver. So all that stuff reduces the toxic load on the liver, helps the liver do its job for you and balance your hormones, but then also like deparalyzes, if that's the right word, your cells who are just like in shock from the constant like flow of toxins so they can actually work for you.
Yeah, so true. And I think there was a study done that showed that an average female or person, mostly women, not all women use beauty products. A lot of other people do, but an average woman uses 30 to 35 things a day. Right. Yeah. And when you think about, okay, so 30 to 35 things of those things are then sending the message to the hormones to do something different. And I think that's the wake up call. Like, oh, if I put this on, it's going to tell my hormones to do something else and I'm not in control. So we want to be the ones driving the hormone train, not what we put on the system.
Yeah, really reducing the toxic load and reducing stress are the top two things I think that you can do to help balance your hormones, at least at the stage for that. You can do other stuff, but if you still have things happening, you're really climbing an even steeper uphill battle because you're undoing everything else you're trying to do. But honestly, this might be a controversial statement, but with food, right? Because you can be eating a whole bunch of good stuff, but if it's laden with chemicals and you're like exposing yourself to all these toxins and you're stressed the heck out, it's really not going to do what you need it to do. So
it backfires.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's a great topic to bring up because food is expensive and you want to make the right choices. Pick the ones, maybe use the Dirty Dozen as your guide, or you can look on the EWG, the Environmental Working Group, look on their website and see the foods that are most toxic, see the things that are going to be impacting you the most, and pick the ones like, okay, no matter what, I'm only going to buy, maybe it's grass-fed beef, organic, whatever it is. I'm just giving an example. But whatever that is, make it those things your priority. And then the other things you're like, okay, I'm gonna do my best. Shop local, get it from, and grow it in your yard. This is the time that you can grow stuff and work with your community. There's so many different ways that you can have healthy food, but it's really important, like you said. And so when you're talking about doing that cleanse and or detox, like detox is such an overused word, I think, but what do you recommend women do at a certain amount of time every year? Is it a seasonal cleanse? Do you need to get those toxins more frequently out of the system because we are in this more toxic environment, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I think it depends on the stage of life that you're in and your particular health situation and lifestyle, right? If you're younger and more resilient and you eat fairly decently, I think you can get away with doing it a couple times a year.
Fairly decently.
For most of the women that I work with that are 35 plus, most of them in their 40s and 50s, and they're dealing with hormonal chaos in their body, which means the slightest thing will wreak havoc on that symphony of hormones. I already said, ladies, it sucks, but it just is what it is. I actually think we benefit from quarterly. When I say cleanse, I'm not meaning drinking only bone broth 14 days. Like
being on the toilet for like 8 hours a day. That is not a cleanse.
No, not extreme things. You should eat and not be hungry when you're cleansing the body. You should be able to eat things that you like and be able to discover the deliciousness of healthy foods. I usually recommend a 14-day cleanse once a quarter. I start my clients out on a 14-day cleanse. I think 14 days is good because by the time you get to about a week, your body is really just starting to get through the sludge.
Ramped up.
Then you stop it at 7 days that's my personal preference.
I do the same thing. Yeah.
But you eat. And like I said, I do recommend, I think quarterly is great, but I don't recommend extreme cleanses and detoxes. You should be eating just the right, whole, natural, clean foods and the right quantities each day.
Yeah, that's so important. I like what you said, the extreme cleanse, and that adds on extra stress to your system. So it actually stresses out the hormones because your body's, oh my God, it goes into total freak mode. You're not giving me anything to eat. You're starving me. I don't know what to do. And so then you actually makes your hormones worse.
Hello, cortisol.
Yeah. So not a good. And so let's talk about that stress and anxiety piece, because we've talked a little bit, but really how is stress and anxiety? And I think especially because with the pandemic, which has been so stressful for people. We're moving out of it, but it still has stress and long-term impacts. I think we're going to see positive and negative, right, over time. But how is that stress factor? You mentioned cortisol, but what's that long-term? Maybe you could just, I don't know, give us some kind of estimation. What's that long-term going to be for patients impacting stress? Are we going to see patients that haven't had stress in the past coming forward? Oh, my hormones are out of whack now because I've been in the pandemic. Or we're going to see this longer term effect, or people need to bring on more mindset techniques, etc.
I think I'm understanding your question. Are you asking me, like, are we seeing a shift in how stress is impacting people like pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic?
Yes. Sorry, I wasn't clear about the question.
That's okay.
But yes, yeah, exactly.
So really interesting question. I personally do see a difference. I think 2 years of trauma that no one was really prepared to experience or deal with has in many ways probably just rewired brains. You know what I mean? People have been in a constant state of survival mode and flight or fight for 2 years. And that's not what the body is designed for, right? We're not made to sustain prolonged periods of stress and anxiety and worry. We're designed to have the trauma and you come down and you come up, and then you come down.
Not like up.
And so I think we're seeing that people now are less tolerant to normal everyday stressors than they were before. We already were in the standard American lifestyle where we were constantly under stress. And because we weren't able to prepare for this situation and we're thrown into it, we didn't really have a lot of the coping skills to begin with. And we're still carrying that forward where we don't really have a lot of coping skills come out of it. And so I do see more and more sensitivity to stress and anxiety, more common instances of stress, anxiety, insomnia. People are not sleeping. And ladies, if you don't sleep, your hormones will be jacked. I'm sorry.
That's right. Yes, it is not and that's an epidemic, right? Insomnia, sleep disorders is a huge epidemic. I would say at least 75% of my patients have insomnia disorder or a sleep disorder, and that's not good. And so if you're listening out there and you need help with your sleep, reach out to Erin or myself so you can reset your system.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think your point about the long-term implications of stress and anxiety, pandemic, and so forth, I think that would be it's going to be interesting to see that unfold. But my hunch is that there are going to be some significant long-term implications. I just think from a trauma perspective, right? Like Chinese medicine perspective, the body work together, and symptoms are just an expression of your body's unresolved emotional issues. So imagine all the emotional energy that has been absorbed and held and not let go in the body for 2 straight years of being trapped in your house or afraid, like being run by fear of getting sick, grief from losing loved ones, like all those emotions combined. And then that affects major organs in the body, right? Like lungs is grief and sorrow. And for example, and I think there are bound to be short and long-term health issues as a result of the stress there. But I think there are still basic like stress management strategies that can be very effective with helping people to start to just manage the day-to-day.
Yeah, I love those points. And it's what I've seen too in my practice is the patients that were already on this like level, either experiencing anxiety currently, it like really elevated their anxiety. And now it's like the focus of helping them instead of, it's running in the background. Oh, stress and anxiety. And I'm talking to them about, let's work on this mindset. And now it's, oh, if we don't address that mindset piece, things are just going to really start to snowball out of control. And I think that what I've seen in my practice is that people that didn't have stress are now learning what that stress management looks like and how, okay, changing your daily life activities in a different way. We saw that from the pandemic, especially like people changing their jobs, changing the way they eat, their family dynamic, all that stuff changing. And for a lot of it for the better, right? We're changing our lives. Yeah. So like you said, I think we'll just see. It's just a question. I'm like always curious about those things myself. What's the impact going to be on my patients? I'm always thinking, okay, if this happens, what's going to be the impact so that I can have the best tools? And I think mindset is a huge piece of what I've really been, my patients are wanting. Like, how do I deal with this? How can I help? Meditation, affirmations, and spiritual guidance, whatever it is.
Yep. And also, we really never will go back to quote unquote normal. Right.
Right.
So
Who wants to?
normal,
It was messed up. Obviously, we wouldn't have had where we are now if it wasn't messed up.
You really won't. So it's like the normal cycle of stress responses. At some point, the body expects that you're go back to some sort of normal, but we really aren't, I don't think, or if we are, we don't know when that's going to happen. We're in the purgatory normal stage. And so that still means that you've got a measure of heightened like anxiety and stress that you're trying to figure out a new normal. You can never really just woosah and go back to the way things were.
Right. Yeah. We're creating that new normal. And I think that more from this whole hormonal perspective, that's what we're talking about, is creating a new normal for your hormones to work better than they were before. And it's all a new mindset shift and a hormonal shift. And so when we're talking about, let's backtrack a little bit and talk about vitamins and minerals, because I think that's a super important piece that you mentioned before. What specific vitamins are really key for regulating menstrual cycle and especially PMS? Because I think that's a huge one that everybody listening out there is, oh my gosh, PMS out the window, right?
Yes, love this question. Like your custom supplements regimen is going to look different for each person, but there are some basic nutrients that every woman needs to think about, especially if you've got PMS issues like that. So vitamin B6 is huge. It helps your body to naturally produce progesterone. As I mentioned earlier, if you don't have the nutrients, sometimes the body can't complete the processes. When your ovaries or adrenals are trying to make progesterone for you, it needs some cofactors to do that. And B6 is a really big one.
Yeah.
B vitamins in general, I recommend that women really take a good amount of them, because especially if you're combining the stress conversation, the more stressed you are, your body basically uses up more B vitamins and magnesium, and they are needed for every cell in the body to do everything. So it's just a good rule of thumb to just make sure you're taking a good B complex, and in particular, maybe add a little extra B6 in there to support progesterone production, which will help minimize PMS symptoms and long and heavy periods, right? It's a great thing. Magnesium, my second preferred supplement, again, needed for every cell in the body. As you stress increases, your body just like dumps magnesium, basically. It just uses it up really quickly. And so you need to make sure that you're keeping your magnesium stores optimal. They will help to minimize PMS symptoms, minimize cramping, minimize anxiety. They have a relaxing effect on the body. So that's really great. Vitamin C is really important. Not only does it help with liver detoxification, so it'll bring down those estrogen levels, if you're trying to boost the progesterone with the B6 and stuff, but it's very nourishing to the adrenal glands as well. So it will help you like calm that stress response and help your body, your adrenals, divert some of those resources to making more progesterone for you, a little bit more testosterone, so you feel like a little more frisky. But all those things have to be balanced in order for you to minimize PMS, in particular, longer heavy periods. So I would usually start with those, and then making sure you have good amounts of healthy fats and cholesterol.
Yes. Healthy fats are key.
Yes. Your body needs fat to make hormones. Fat is not bad. It's the right fat.
It's good for you, right? Yeah. The right fat, like you said. And if you're on a low fat diet and you're not eating fat, you are not going to make hormones, period.
No. You need the omega-3s and the healthy fatty acids, but then also cholesterol. Sometimes people just need to eat a boiled egg or two a day and just get some straight cholesterol if you're really low on like DHEA, progesterone, testosterone, because your liver literally takes the cholesterol and makes a bunch of hormones
Exactly.
to other parts of the body, so they can, like the adrenals, so they can make the hormones, and most of us don't realize that. So I think those were like the 4 that I would start with everybody. B vitamins, specifically B6, magnesium, vitamin C, healthy fats, in particular managing your cholesterol levels and getting those healthy fatty acids and omega-3s.
Yeah, so important. And vitamin C is great for iron absorption too. And when we're talking about like heavy bleeding, we need that specific piece to help our body to absorb the iron and use the iron in a positive way. And we didn't even talk about that. That's a whole, we could talk about all different types of things for sure.
Because so many women are dealing with anemia and don't know why. And then they take iron supplements and don't realize why it doesn't fix it.
Exactly. Or they're not taking the wrong type of iron. And I like to use a combination of herbal iron or herbs that are high in iron for helping the body absorb in combination with other things. Because then it's not the straight iron and they're getting like constant, like it has a lot of downstream effects.
100%.
Yeah. And iron, vitamin C, like we mentioned, is really key. And you mentioned eating healthy fats, which is so important. Are there any other superfoods that you'd really like in combination for superfoods?
Yes. If you want to talk about PMS in particular, and I connect like PMS and also long and heavy periods, because a lot of times they root from the same things and you can get from the same supports. As many green leafy vegetables and cruciferous vegetables as you can get into your body, the better. Darker the green, the better. Now there's some interesting schools of thought about like raw kale and raw spinach
and broccoli and cauliflower. Yes, there's been some thyroid trains of thought.
Gently cooked. Generally, I advocate for cooked foods, gently cooked,
with still nutrients.
Raw anyway. I know there's people who do raw diets, and that's a whole nother conversation, but like from again, Chinese medicine perspective, or just looking at how our body works, if you are having a significant imbalance, usually you got compromised digestion. Like that's almost a given. And so the way to think about it for me is the easier you can make it for your body to assimilate and absorb, the better. And the reality is your body has to work less to assimilate and absorb from cooked foods. Now, you don't want to overcook it, gently steaming, gently sauteing, and some healthy fat. So you get the fats too.
Coconut oil or ghee.
Make it taste yummy with some sea salt, some herbs, and you've got like delicious things. But I'm a big fan of detox soups and like sauteed veggies and a little bit of sauteed salmon or fatty fish, and you've got some great meals. But green leafy veggies, cruciferous vegetables, that entire family is rich with DIM. It's a word that I have a hard time pronouncing, but it's a critical cofactor in phase 1 liver detoxification to get those excess hormones out. You can't really make it in the body, so you have to consume it, for example. And though both of those sets of vegetables contain pretty much all the nutrients we just talked about.
Exactly.
And fat, except the fat. And then also recommending clean meats. I don't recommend veganism for women who have significant hormonal imbalances, especially thyroid issues. In particular, like meats is the best source of B vitamins in particular. It's the most available, the best source of protein, which you need all of those things to balance hormones in different ways. But even if you don't want like red meat, for example, you can fish. Like fish is okay. Salmon, cod, mackerel, sardines.
Good fatty fishes.
And you don't have to have a huge hunk of meat at every meal. A reasonable portion, about 3 to 4 ounces, once or twice a day, of the right clean meat is okay. It's sufficient. And then the last thing I say is nuts. I really recommend seeds and nuts.
They're so good.
Another source of fiber, in addition to the vegetables, another source of fatty acids and omega-3s and other nutrients. Some people even use seed cycling, which is another way to use different seeds and nuts throughout your period, your menstrual cycle weeks, in order to make sure you're getting the right nutrients.
Yeah. Oh, those are all great. And I love that seed cycle component. And you can probably do you have a resource, a blog about seed cycling? So you can, that's a great place for a resource, is Erin's blog. And as we're finishing up today, we're going to talk about all those things, how you can find her and then find all her resources. We could talk forever, but I want to be cognizant of both of our times as we're wrapping up. So one last question, then we're going to talk about your wonderful call to actions, resources, and how people can find you. So if you had an unlimited budget right now, what would you do to make the biggest impacts on the planet?
Oh, this is a great question. I have an answer though, because I applied for a grant for this and I did not get it. But one thing that I've noticed in the work that I do is access to this like information and coaching support to help women from underprivileged communities is pretty much non-existent. And so if you can afford to pay cash for a coach to work with you and help you learn all this stuff and help you like change your life, if you may not have exposure to even this realm of healthcare, to even be aware of it, to know where to go on the internet, even if you don't have a computer can go to the library and get one, right? It means that that really there is an equity and access to a large chunk of women to be able to be liberated and empowered to take control of their health. And so I would create a freely accessible online course that anybody could access that walks any woman who is interested in trying to reclaim her health through hormonal balance, to be able to learn the basics on how to do that. And then also have some sort of like scholarship fund or something that women can apply to be able to access things like Misfits Market, where you get discounted organic produce or like things like that, where they can start to infuse some of the more practical logistical things to apply those things in their life. But I would try to make this more accessible to all women, as women who are privileged to have the resources to be able to for it.
Yeah, that's super, super great. I love that. And there's lots of grants out there. Keep applying, because I think I think that's a really key thing to have, but also I think there's definitely a place for it. There's a grant out there. I can see it coming to you. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have the hope.
Right. Yeah, totally. How can people find you? Your website, talk about your freebie, the herbs to heal your gut. And then you have an amazing bonus for the listeners. So talk about all those three things there.
Yeah. So my website is bodylovewellness.net, and you'll find tons of blog posts and tons of information about all things women's health, along with more description of the different services that I offer. I'm very active on social media. I have a blog every week, and all sorts of freebies and free information I give away. So you can find me on Instagram at bodylove.well or Facebook at bodylove. And so my freebie for right now is I have a free download resource that walks you through herbs that can help to deal with the myriad of digestive woes. So if you want to know like how natural ways to use food as medicine there, check that out. You can grab it on my website. And for Dr. Lulu's listeners, through the end of this, if you use code GENIUS when you sign up for a service or DM me, you'll get 20% off any service or product that you purchase or sign up for. My signature program is the 90-day hormone transformation. And in 90 days, we walk through all the basics of how to balance your hormones and empower women through educating them about how their bodies works. You get a cooking class and all sorts of fun things. So hit me up, DM me for a free consultation, and I'd love to help you figure out your path to hormonal balance.
Great, Erin. I love all of those things you're doing. You're doing such great stuff. And thanks for the wonderful discount for our listeners. They're going to be stoked to see what you're doing and to talk to you and chat more and sign up for your program. That sounds amazing, to learn about hormonal health and to change their body.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
You're welcome, Erin. Thanks again so much. And I can't wait to share it with the world.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.